Well, thanks, Scott, and good morning. And as Scott mentioned, obviously for dried beans, we'll be looking at the weather and as you probably can guess, having the weather forecast along with this and the dependence, there are some issues to talk about. Well, I'll cover those here in a couple minutes. But looking at the week in review, though, we'll start off there. On the left-hand side here, it was warmer than normal. That's not a surprise at all. It's been warmer than normal for much of the spring thus far. Departures here across actually the entire region, Great Lakes and Upper Midwest, all above warmer than normal here the last week. And the departures range from about 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in far north to as much as 8 to 10 in the south. And you can see that especially in the southeast, where we had some values up again, up almost in double digits. Just as interesting and maybe more interesting, looking at precip totals here for the last week. On the right-hand side, it really depended on where you were, but there was a very strong northwest to southeast gradient of precipitation during the last week, with a lot more precipitation as the farther north and west you went in the state. And the yellow color here indicates at least 2 inches. Some cases we had more than 3 inches of rain for the last week, which is much wetter than normal. But you can see large portions of western upper Michigan and then even some spots into the far northern lower really got quite a bit of precipitation. In contrast, as you go south, down, especially down to the southeast and south central part of lower Michigan, most areas there, and this is indicated in the areas in blue, less than half an inch, in many areas less than a quarter of an inch. So the bottom line was here, we, again, depending on the location, we had some people really change quickly. The soil conditions drying, and it was off to the races. And I know most people have seen, I think actually Scott had a picture of the dust. There's been a lot of, at least in this part of the state and south, there's been an awful lot going on and quite a bit of progress made here. That is going to continue at least for the short term. But we do have some changes coming once again, as we've been locked in a very active weather pattern. We lucked out a little bit earlier this week, in at least in southern parts of the state, and did not see some of the precip that had been forecast. But in general, we're looking at a fairly active pattern, at least for the next the bulk of the upcoming week. And following up on that, and just to look at some soil moisture here, we're only looking now at the top 15 or 16 inches of the soil profile. So really looking at topsoil moisture. On the left-hand side here, these are percentiles. So it's the current soil moisture expressed in terms of a percentile. And the blues and the high numbers are relative high soil moisture, and vice versa with the yellows and oranges relatively low. And again, it's a little difficult. This is for the whole lower 48, but you can see that in northern parts of the state, not surprisingly, lots of high percentiles above normal soil moisture. This is relative soil moisture, so it's what plants can extract from that top 15 to 16 inches in the topsoil. But note here, especially as we get down into central and southern lower, there's quite a few areas, growing numbers of areas that have tan or brown, rapid dry off. And at the same time, and we've talked about this, but it really was very true this past week. We had relatively high potential evapotranspiration rates. Again, that's the demand to the atmosphere, the rate that water can evaporate from the surface, and it's been high especially because of the above normal temperatures. But we've had a lot of sunshine at the same time, and both those things drive that water demand. And so even in areas that got the rain, it dried out more quickly than typically is the case for this time of the year. On the right-hand side here, this is the relative change in this soil moisture in the top of the profile here. And again, not just like we've been saying, the pattern in the northern part of the state, it got wetter and there were more delays and then more challenges. But in the south, it was the exact opposite, and things dried out really rapidly, or much more rapidly than they typically do here for this time of the year. So that indicates, again, in Michigan, a quite a variable situation. Not surprising, but it has definitely changed in the south. Soil temperatures, Scott talked about this quite a bit. This on the left-hand side here, looking at Michigan, soil temperatures generally increased a few degrees again last week, given the warmer than normal week, and range from the upper 50s average in northern parts of the state now to almost 70 in the far south. That's the first time this season we've gotten there. You can see that in the yellow down, especially in the southwestern. That's the where we have warmest conditions. And on the right-hand side here, this is a 1 week time series of air that's in the dark red, and then the soil temperature down below in the bars here for the last week at East Lansing on campus with our EnviroWeather site there. And you can see that we've added about 2 or 3 degrees Fahrenheit just in the last week with a slow upward trend. Now, that said, we are looking at a forecast with probably some cooler weather coming next week. So my guess is that at least in terms of soil temperature, I think the best bet is right now, we probably will certainly see some leveling off, if not a little bit of a decrease or drop off in some of these values here next week. The other issue is water, because we do have for most all areas, we do have precipitation coming both later tomorrow and early Saturday, and then by the end of the weekend into early next week, which looks like a pretty unsettled pattern. So again, right now these values are quite a bit warmer than they typically are for this time of the year, but the soil temperatures haven't been an issue here. It's been the water and whether people can get out and get work done. And again, for the southern part of the state, that's still going to be the case, especially today. And thank you for being here today when it's such a beautiful day outside. But that's going to probably change, or at least be less favorable as we move into the weekend. Degree day totals here for the season going back to the beginning of March, still above normal, reflecting those warmer than normal temperatures we've had earlier. The totals right now ranging from about 200 in the far northern parts of the state to just over 500 in the southwest. And in terms of climatology, that's several days to 1 to 2 weeks, calendar weeks ahead of normal. So that surplus is there. I'm going to comment on that at the very end, because our new long lead outlooks are consistent where we've been. They're calling for warmer than normal temperatures for much of the upcoming growing season. So one thing I think is to plan on, but at least think fairly high confidence, the surpluses in degree days and warmth that we have right now are probably going to be with us for most all, if not all, of the upcoming growing season. Well, let's look at here the outlook. As I mentioned, we've been in a very active weather pattern across the upper Midwest, actually the whole Midwest here for the last several weeks. This is no exception to that. We've had a little bit of a respite here in the satellite down in the lower left to just gorgeous conditions across the state this morning. Temperatures in the upper 40s into low mid 50s. Beautiful start of the day, because it's going to be a beautiful day. So what you see now is what you get with temperatures here today with high pressure across the region, generally in the 70s for highs. Less breezy. Scott showed some of the wind from yesterday. We should see there will be some breeze in the afternoon, but nothing like what we saw yesterday. But mostly sunny, dry conditions across the whole state as the next weather system to impact us, and you can see that out over the northern Great Plains and Rockies. That heads our way for tomorrow, and this is 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And you can see that moving into Minnesota, and the green there, at least the chance for precipitation developing from west to east across the state. Right now, it looks like it will be very late afternoon or early evening. That would be in the western upper peninsula, and then maybe moving into the far western lower here this evening. Most areas, though, it will be later this evening and overnight as that frontal boundary. You can see the red warm front there and a cold and occluded front behind it. That's a system that's going to bring us some fairly widespread rainfall. Most areas will be looking at a quarter to half an inch of water with this. Some areas will be in the western part of the state, maybe a little bit more than that. But again, it will develop west to east and be over in most spots by the late morning or midday on Saturday morning. And here's the map for Saturday morning. You can see the frontal boundary making its way through the state. We should see things then at least temporarily clear off and dry out for late Saturday and into the beginning of Sunday. But the second weather system in this very, very active weather pattern is on its way. And I have one more here. This is taken from the forecast numerical guidance, but this is for Tuesday morning. And some of the guidance is still having some issues on the timing of the next one of the model families has the precipitation really coming late Sunday and into Monday, and then continuing for the next couple of days. The other major forecast tool has it delayed a little bit more than that. But regardless, there is going to be the threat of more precip, certainly by the beginning of next week, and then probably continuing on a daily basis, at least Monday, Tuesday, possibly even Wednesday. So thinking about this, the big picture, and in terms of progress and field work and planting and all the things that need to happen right now, there are going to be some challenges here, especially late weekend and early next week. And so one of the take homes certainly is, given a day like today and given most of tomorrow, take advantage of it as much as possible. It will be worth the while, because things probably will get a little bit more dicey here, especially in the next 3, 4, 5 days. In terms of precip totals for the whole period here, looking at a fairly wet week. And this is probably a little aggressive on totals, but you can see a little bit of a northeast to southwest increase in precip. Heaviest totals across western and southern lower Michigan, some cases more than 1.5 inches. That would certainly really slow things down, certainly relative to where they've been over the last few days or several days. But again, anticipating some significant delays or slower progress here as we move into the middle of next week. Notice, though, in the northern part of the state, which has been recently wetter, that there the totals are forecast to be lower. In many cases, less than 3/4 or 1/2 inch. And most of the precip in the north will come with the system tomorrow, the first one, whereas in the south, the majority of the precipitation probably coming again at the end of the weekend and into early next week. So a little bit of a difference in timing, but as has been the case in many of the last several weeks, relatively frequent chances for precipitation. Will also probably be, as we've seen too, probably looking at some severe weather somewhere in the Midwest, but not, I don't think in Michigan. It probably will remain to our south and west, and we've been fortunate in that regard with a couple of exceptions. But the conditions have been worse with regard to severe weather as you go south and west from Michigan in general. In terms of potential evapotranspiration rates for the upcoming week, a little bit less than what we have seen recently. Most areas between the weekly totals between 1.1 and 1.3 inches. So it will still be about, or maybe a little bit better than that's about 1,500s to about 1,800s per day on average. So still a little bit above normal, but not as much above normal as where we've been for the last 1 to 2 weeks. And then looking into farther beyond or ahead of that, some changes indicated in our medium range forecast guidance. And on the lower left-hand side here, if we look at the jet stream pattern, one of the changes you see here, there's a big trough over really the Great Lakes region and portions of eastern lower 48 and eastern North America. That's a change. And because many of the troughs that have come through have just kept going. We've had the surface low pressure go through and our precip with it, but they didn't hang around very long, and just the pattern would reload and we'd have another system come a couple days later. Well, this one looks like we actually see the trough hang around a little bit, and what that should result in the upper right-hand corner here, it is some cooling, relative cooling, and we will notice that here early next week. And so while I mentioned here highs, tomorrow will be the warmest day of the week, probably, with highs back upper 70s to low 80s in most areas. But we'll see a slow decline over the weekend, and probably only in the upper 60s to around 70 by early next week. So not cold, but certainly cooler than it has been. And I mentioned our soil temperatures probably will reflect that well when we look at those next week as well, and especially given that many of them will be wet as well. So expect some fall off in soil temperatures over the upcoming week. Notice also lower right-hand corner here for this. So this is for the last few days of May, that we're expecting to see a little bit less frequency in terms of precip and again near normal precipitation totals, and 8 to 14 days pretty similar to this. So at least a temporary change in the pattern that we've been in, and it's more towards, we'll call it seasonable type conditions. Now, longer than that, we do have a new long lead outlook. Some of that is based on the fact that we were transitioned recently from a strong El Nino event in the Pacific. We're now neutral, so the sea surface temperatures in the central and eastern Pacific are fairly close to normal, but they're cooling off. And we're going to be looking at La Nina or cool episode conditions here by later this year. That will have more of an impact as we move later into this year. Probably not so much here now, but it is a rapid transition. On the right-hand side here, those blue bars are the probability of La Nina coming back here by this fall. And so we'll be talking about that more later. But to summarize here, looking at the outlooks themselves, on the top is the outlook for June for mean temperatures on the left, and then precipitation totals on the right. No direction. The equal chances essentially are saying for the month of June, we don't have a forecast direction one way or the other, either for the mean temps or the precip. However, the important one here, long lead, June, July, and August on the bottom row here, still looking at the outlook still consistently suggest warmer than normal mean temperatures for the summer. Actually, it goes beyond that. It goes into the fall as well. So I mentioned those surpluses and degree day units. If we get them early in the year like we are now in May, many times statistically, that either the surplus or the deficit in the cool springs, we're stuck with it for a lot of the year. I think that will definitely be the case this year, and we probably will end up with a surplus of heat units here this year. Notice also finally on the precip totals on the lower right, no direction really on precipitation totals for the upcoming, but warmer than normal has been consistent here for the last several months. And so summarizing here, once again, looking at a more unsettled weather pattern coming up, especially as we move into the late weekend. And man, unfortunately, holiday weekend, Memorial Day may be a little wet, but probably some changes in terms of availability and opportunities versus what we have right now. And as you just saw, looking at a maybe a little more seasonable, cooler, and maybe a little bit drier in many areas of the state here as we move into next week and in the first part of June. And with that, I'm going to wrap up here and introduce next week's speaker, and that will be Dr. Marty Chilvers. He's going to be with us next Thursday, the 30th. And good timing. He's already talked about this on several occasions, but Marty's going to be talking about wheat fungicide application. So that's, again, 1 week from today, next Thursday. And with that, I'm going to hand it back off to Phil to talk about RUP. Thanks.